would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land. I am currently on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I want to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. So for the last 2.5 years, Community Power Agency has been telling a powerful story for change right across Australia. We've been working with community energy groups to talk about the transition to clean energy. Also at Climate Action Network Australia, a number of organisations came together to think about how would we go about working together to run a campaign to repower Australia with 100% renewables. So this presentation is the culmination of those two strands of work, or part of the culmination of those two strands of works, and was the basis of a small grant that CANA gave Community Power Agency to run a pilot presenters program around this, this presentation. We were inspired by Beyond Zero Emissions and the Al Gore Climate Reality Project, and thought that telling a story about the clean energy transition would be something that would be a really useful tool for grassroots activists and climate advocates across the country. So as Ella said, this is sort of my last hurrah recording this presentation and sharing it with as many people who want to use it as possible. So without further ado, I will get started. So Australia stands at a crossroads. We have a choice, and that choice no longer is a choice between dirty energy and clean energy. It's a choice about how we transition to clean energy. Will that transition be slow, messy and leave many behind, or will it be fast, equitable and lead to a better Australia? That is fundamentally our choice, because the transition to clean energy is now inevitable. But what is not inevitable is that then this transition will be as fast as the climate science demands and as fair as we should all demand. And so that is really our role, to drive a faster and fairer transition to clean energy. And this transition to clean energy is really inevitable for 5 main reasons. The first is the cost. It's pretty great when the economics are on the side of the environment, and in this case, they certainly are. There was a report by the Australian Energy Market Operator and CSIRO that came out December last year, and that found that it's now cheaper to build wind and solar plants than it is to build a new coal power station or a new gas power station. And even if you add backup in terms of pumped hydro energy storage or batteries, the price is still cheaper than building a new fossil fuel generator. So that means that then transition, as coal power stations and gas power stations retire, the transition will primarily be to renewable sources of electricity. The second reason it's inevitable is that we have aging coal-fired power stations. For many, many years, our Australian electricity system was powered predominantly by coal. We're about 85% coal powered. That is now coming down, in part because 10 coal-fired power stations have shut down in the last decade. We now have 19 coal-fired power stations left across Australia. In New South Wales, where I am, 4 of those 5 coal-fired power stations are predicted to shut down by 2035. That would be when they reach a 50-year lifespan, which is actually beyond the design life of most coal-fired power stations. And the thing is that as aging coal-fired power stations age, these coal-fired power stations age, they start to become more unreliable. So we're seeing coal and gas plants start to break down more. In fact, in 2018, the Australia Institute found that coal and gas plants were breaking down on average every 3 days. The third reason the transition to a clean energy is inevitable, particularly here in Australia, is that we have some of the best renewable energy resources in the world, if not the best renewable energy resources in the world. We are the sunburnt land, and we also have amazing wind resources and a huge amount of land. that means that not only can we power ourselves with renewable energy, but we can help our neighbours. And that becomes the new competitive advantage for Australia moving forward. Fourth reason, Australians love renewable energy. We are #1 in the world for rooftop solar. We've got more than 2.2 million households with solar on their roofs. And that was up from just 100,000 a little over a decade ago. And at the moment, we're seeing about 3,000 Australian households going solar every week. In fact, October 2019 was the largest month for rooftop solar in Australia's history. So this is even increasing. It just makes sense. And the fifth reason that this transition to clean energy is inevitable is that it creates a better life for everyone. Clean energy drives regional economic development and regional jobs because the renewables are predominantly located in regional Australia. Cleaner air. Our coal-fired power stations are some of the most polluting in the world and produce some of the largest quantities of not just carbon dioxide and greenhouse gas pollution, but also toxic pollution like particulate matter, SOx and NOx. It's thus, this transition is about creating a healthy future for our children. And because renewables are now cheaper and they're modular, they enable us to take control of our energy bills and lower the amount of, that we are paying for our electricity. And of course, it's about combating and tackling climate change. Renewable energy are zero carbon sources of electricity, and not only can they be used to power our electricity system, but our transport and energy as well. So that's the good news. And the even better news is it's achievable. Experts agree that 100% renewables is 100% doable. In fact, over the last decade, there's been 9 studies to this effect, starting out with Beyond Zero Emissions in 2010, that released the Zero Carbon Australia Stationary Energy Plan. I was involved in a 100% renewable study by the University of Technology Sydney, Australian Energy Market Operator, CSIRO, Energy Networks Australia, and the list goes on. We really can do this, and we can do it in the time frame that climate science is saying is necessary if we get on with it. So it's achievable, that's good. The even better news is that we have a plan, the Repower Australia plan. So 18 months ago, 7 organisations came together to launch this plan to repower Australia with 100% renewables and more. And I was proud to be the lead author of that plan, and it built on a previous plan called the Homegrown Power Plan. And it really sets out the kind of policies and pathways that we need to take to get to 100% renewables and repower Australia. Many people ask me, well, that's great, we've got a plan, you know, experts say it's achievable, but how will it actually work? You know, what does a 100% renewable energy system look like? So I thought I would share with you the 8 elements of a 100% renewable system. So first one, we're going to go big on the least cost stuff. And the least cost renewables are large wind farms and large solar farms. So we're going to see a lot of them across the windiest and sunniest parts of Australia and those places that have the best grid access. So we're going to see big renewables connected to large grid infrastructure. Then we're going to fill the gap, you know, when the sun isn't shining and the wind isn't blowing, we're going to fill the gaps with other renewable technologies and storage. So batteries, people I'm sure have heard about the big battery in South Australia. We've got a pumped hydro project down in the Shoalhaven with other pumped hydro projects planned. Concentrating solar thermal, we haven't gotten that operating at an electricity scale in Australia, but there are still plans afoot. In fact, I heard that a new company has purchased the Port Augusta solar project, proposed Port Augusta solar project, so that might get revitalised. Then, of course, there's batteries, and batteries can, I've already talked about big battery, but they can be as big as, you know, the big battery in South Australia, or they can be as small as what we can use in our homes. And then there's sustainable bioenergy, and that's distinct from bioenergy that is, you know, chopping down native forests. That is not a renewable or sustainable source of electricity, and shouldn't be something that it forms part of a 100% renewable system for Australia, but rather biogas, so from human and agricultural and animal waste that is digested and creates methane that can be burnt cleanly. So that's the second element, and we're going to spread those out, and they're going to have different durations, because some of the things, sometimes we're going to need just 5 minutes of power when there's a real surge in demand, and sometimes we're going to need power to fill the gaps, and this capacity to fill the gaps for, say, 2 days while there's a wind lull, which can happen particularly during Australian winters. But Australia is very lucky, unlike some places in, say, Northern Europe. We have sunshine all year round, and so we can utilise that. The final thing that I'll say is that, you know, we are moving paradigms. We've had a paradigm of electricity provision in the 20th century that was based on base load power and peak load power at the top. So coal power plants that run all the time, and the reason they run all the time is because they're most efficient, and they find it really difficult to ramp up and down. But the thing is that our electricity demand isn't constant. We use it more at some times than in others. So we then needed peaking plants to fill in the gaps. That's the old way of doing electricity. We're moving to a new paradigm where the bulk of our electricity supply will be generated from variable renewables such as solar and wind, and then the gaps will be filled by dispatchable renewables and demand response, which I will get there. So we're moving to this paradigm of variable and dispatchable clean energy. So third element of the 100% renewable system of the future, it's going to be small so everyone can benefit. We're going to see up to 45% of our electricity coming from communities and households and businesses. So as I've already said, 2.2 million households have solar on their roof. I'm going to talk more about the numerous community energy groups that are developing local solutions. We're starting to see Aboriginal communities to really starting to benefit from clean energy, farmers. Currently, about 30 to 40% of households rent or live in apartments, so they're currently locked out of solar. We're developing some solutions at Community Power Agency to try and address that so that everyone can actually benefit. And that includes businesses, fossil fuel workers, councils, and the list goes on and on. It's really quite exciting. Fourth part of the 100% renewable system is that industry and transport will go renewable too. So we will move away from our transport being powered by diesel to a renewable system, or petrol, to mostly our passenger vehicles and a lot of our public transport being electrified. And if you electrify transport, you can then power with renewable energy. For some of our heavier duty freight, we might look to renewable powered hydrogen and other solutions like that. And it's not just transport, it's industry as well. Currently, there are a lot of industries that rely on gas for heating and for chemical processes. We will look, Beyond Zero Emissions did a great electrifying industry report that showed that we have the technology solutions available to electrify or move industry to hydrogen in pretty much every industry that we have here in Australia. The fifth element of the clean energy future will be that demand is as important as supply. You've probably heard about the demand response rule change that is going through, energy efficiency programs. Hopefully you've got energy efficient light bulbs and are looking to make buildings energy efficient as well. So from the UTS report that I was involved in, we looked at what it would take to get to 100% renewable electricity and out of coal power by 2030. And what we found was that actually energy productivity or energy efficiency was the biggest fuel source. So if we can be doubling our energy productivity or reducing our electricity needs, but still delivering real value to us as people who live in homes and work in buildings and in various industries, that we can more accurately, it's much easier to get to 100% renewables if we are efficient about it. And if we start to see demand follow supply as much as supply following demand. So we now have a lot of solar in the middle of the day. Are there some industrial processes that can be shifted from a nighttime operating overnight to operating in the middle of the day? We have off-peak hot water, so a lot of households heat up their water for showers and the like overnight. Can we move that to the middle of the day? Demand response has been something that we've been doing ever since electricity has was being invented, but we can become more sophisticated around it with a whole bunch of innovative software and technology solutions. We're going to have poles and wires. I think you might have heard from about 5 years ago a lot of talk about the death spiral and the idea that everyone will go off grid. Some people will, and some towns will go off grid. There are some places in Australia where it doesn't make sense to connect a really long wire from a large renewable generator to that community, and instead they can be powered by a microgrid with local renewables and storage. But the grid is essential, and the way that I think about the grid is it's part of the social safety net. It's part of ensuring that every person and every business can access electricity, which is fundamentally an essential service. But we will have less grid in some places, and we will have more grid in some places. So the Australian Energy Market Operator, AEMO, has identified, I think it's something like 47 renewable energy zones, which would be those places where we already have some of the grid and represent significant renewable energy opportunities, that we could build out the transmission lines and increase the amount of renewables we deploy in those places. Just 2 weeks ago, the New South Wales government announced that it was going to trial the development of one of these renewable energy zones. So we're going to see more and more of that. 7, and this is what I'm going to be spending a lot of my time on the next few years, is we're going to export renewables to the world. Australia, as I said, is blessed with some of the best renewable resources in the world, and there are some places that are going to need our help. So one of the export pathways is around renewable hydrogen, where you use renewable electricity to electrolyze or split water, and then that hydrogen can be used as a fuel, or it can be used as a chemical feedstock, or it can be converted into ammonia that can then be shipped overseas and then converted back into hydrogen and used in a whole bunch of other ways. The National Hydrogen Strategy got released, I think, a week and a half ago, and it has some good things in there. There's some concerning things because there's a push to have hydrogen from coal and gas, and I think that is a bad pathway, and it's certainly not a pathway to 100% renewables and beyond. So, but that's an area to watch out for. I said there were 8 elements of the energy system of the future. The 8th element of the renewable energy system of the future, 100% renewable system, is it's going to be more reliable in extreme weather. Climate change means that we will be having more extreme weather events, that the blackout in South Australia that saw transmission lines folded in half are going to be a thing of the future. So what can we do to make our energy system more resilient? Well, microgrids are a real opportunity. So I've already talked about microgrids where at the edge of grid, where communities will be taken off the grid, but then there will be communities which have enough electricity generation and battery storage that they can be disconnected for the grid from say 6 to 12 or 24 hours. So that means that we can flick a switch on and off to have those communities or suburbs or households operating for that shorter period of time. So when the grid goes down, and if you look at the graph on the right-hand side, the majority of reason we have blackouts is because the grid goes down. When the grid goes down, if we have these grid-connected microgrids that can be islanded, what we call islanded, then we have a much more reliable electricity system than we have right now. And that's a huge opportunity for Australia. In fact, Western Power in WA is looking at how it can commercialise microgrid technology and help people all over the world through this microgrid technology. So that's the good news, and that's what the 100% renewables future, I think, looks like. And certainly from synthesizing and reading all of those 9 reports, that's kind of the elements that are consistent across those 9 reports. The bad news is we're being held back by coal companies. You know, the coal companies stand to lose hundreds of billions of dollars in revenue if we move to a 100% renewable system. You know, that's why we saw Clive Palmer invest $60 million in the federal election. That's why we saw Glencore spend $5 million on a PR campaign to smear renewables. You know, they are fighting hard because they know what they have to lose, and they're being quite successful here in Australia. And they're not the only ones, because we're also getting ripped off by energy companies. So Victoria University found that after Hazelwood got shut down, the big 3 energy companies and the coal generators used that as an opportunity to price gouge consumers to the tune of about $100 million that we were paying extra on our power bills. So you know, there's a real oligopoly in our electricity system, and that market power is currently bad for consumers and holding us back from the energy transition. And they're not alone. The politicians in their pocket kind of seem to like coal a lot, as I'm sure most of you know, at a federal level, and that's the nexus that we need to break. And I think that there are huge opportunities because we can take back control. We have to fight for the solutions that take back and physically take back control of our energy and our future. And the good news is that a whole bunch of communities and activists and companies are getting on with it. And so I want to tell you just a few stories of some of the communities and projects that are showcasing and leading examples of how, you know, we're taking back control. So my friend Jonathan Prendergast, and a collaborator with Community Power Agency, guy in the bottom right corner, he works in clean energy, but was pretty frustrated that there wasn't a lot of solar going on rooftops in the Shire. And the Shire, for those who don't know, is home base for Scott Morrison and Craig Kelly. So he decided to set up a community energy group called Sunny Shire, and they've been running a bulk buy program to support households in that community to go solar and get batteries. And he's even now got a Tesla electric car. So, you know, this is just a small example. Community energy groups have been doing bulk buys since about 2007 and have really helped to accelerate the uptake of renewable energy. And they're a really great example of making solar accessible to those who might be confused and unsure of what, the right solutions might be. Then there's solar gardens. So that obviously is me. I'm a renter and I live in an apartment in inner Sydney. I would really like to have solar on my roof, and I have asked my landlord and he said no. So what am I going to do? Well, that's why for about the last 5 years, we've been trying to develop this solution called solar gardens. So it's a model that works in the US. And we went, well, if it works in the US, maybe we can figure out how to adapt it for the Australian context. And that's what we've been doing. So the idea is that I, as a renter, purchase, say, 5 kilowatts in a shared solar array. And that might be in a big warehouse roof near the Sydney airport, or it might be on a solar farm at the edge of town to a country town a bit, you know, in Western New South Wales. So then my 5 kilowatts, the electricity produced from those 5 kilowatts are credited on my electricity bill by the electricity retail that's signed up to be part of this Solar Gardens program. And that way I get the benefits of having solar without having to have it on my own roof, because many people don't have a sunny roof. In fact, there's about 1 million people in New South Wales alone, 1 million households in New South Wales alone that don't own their own sunny roof. And that's probably an underestimation. So if that's an interesting idea that you want to find out more about, I suggest you check out our campaign, solarforall.org.au. Then let's go big. So there's this guy, Sanjeev Gupta. He's a British industrialist. He likes steel, and he saw an opportunity. Whyalla Steel is, fairly famous steelworks. In fact, it was used as a bit of a punching bag around the carbon price campaign, scare campaign. It was going bankrupt. Nothing to do with the carbon price. And so the future of that town and the something like 3,000 workers who worked at Liberty One Steel, their livelihoods were in the balance. And Sanjeev Gupta came to Australia and went, I see a real opportunity here to power steel using renewable energy and power other heavy industry. And so not only did he purchase Whyalla Steel, he has then bought a stake in a clean energy company, and they're in the process of building $1 billion worth of renewable energy, particularly a solar farm. They're also looking at pumped hydro and others and battery solutions. They're starting out with the 280 megawatts CANA solar farm, and that's in return employing 350 workers and generating additional benefits. And I believe, but you'll have to fact check me on this, that he has also helped his workers get rooftop solar at the same time. So we're starting to see leading businesses see the opportunity of taking back control, empowering themselves with renewable energy. We have seen the launch of the RE100, where some of Australia's largest companies are moving to 100% renewables. In fact, the big 4 banks have all committed to go to 100% renewables, I believe, by 2025. And Bank Australia is already powered with 100% renewables. One of my favourite community energy groups, if I'm allowed to play favourites, is Totally Renewable Yackandandah. So Matt Charles Jones, guy on the right-hand corner, he came along to the first Community Energy Congress in Canberra that we organised and got inspired. And from there, he's worked with his community to come up with a vision to go to 100% renewables by 2022. And in partnership with a whole range of organisations, particularly an organisation called Mondo Power, deliver a lot of pretty simple local energy solutions. So they've done bulk buys of rooftop solar and batteries, bulk buys of efficient lighting and heat pump hot water and solar hot water. And now they're looking and developing microgrid solutions that would enable local energy trading. They're working in partnership with a new organisation, Indigo Power, that is a community-owned retailer. And the list goes on. And what's really exciting about Totally Renewable Yackandandah is they've inspired their neighbours to do the same thing. So there are now 14 community energy groups in northeast Victoria. And that is the home to Indi, the electorate that has just elected its second independent MP in a row, Helen Haynes. And Helen Haynes was actively involved in community energy in that region. So we're starting to see political ramifications of the really great on-the-ground work that communities are doing. Final story that I thought I would share is Stucco Housing Cooperative. So they're a housing co-op, student housing co-op in Sydney, near where I live. Yeah, they're pretty, don't have a lot of disposable incomes, and their bills were starting to bite. So one of the engineers that lived there got a bee in his bonnet and got excited and got a grant from the City of Sydney to do the first solar and battery microgrid in Australia. And so they've installed solar on the roof, they've installed a big battery bank, and together they've They now produce or generate 80% of the electricity needs from their microgrids, and each person in Stockholm is saving about $35 a month off their electricity bill. So it's a good news story. And they're not alone. Community energy groups are popping up all around the country. There are 110, I think, that I've mapped in the last, and Community Power Agency has mapped in the last little while. There's more than 150 operating community energy projects now. This map needs to be updated because one of my last projects at Community Power Agency was going to run a workshop for a new community energy group in Yeppoon in central Queensland, heart of coal country, who was really excited to take control back of their energy future and go to renewable energy. So look out for great stories from community energy in Yeppoon. So what's left to do? Get on with it. Together we can make the clean energy transition faster and fairer for all. Thank you.